Hi, everyone. It is so cool that we're all together at the same time. It's kind of like one step towards being together in person. And I loved what Lauren said at the start, like that God is omnipresent. That means, if you remember what she said, there's no place that he isn't. So that means he's there with Barry and Anne. He's here with us. He's with Sergio. He's with Barbara. He's over with Amy's parents in England right now. So actually, we are in one meeting in the presence of God. So just the limitations of our physical existence doesn't let us see that or experience that, but we are together in his presence, celebrating who he is and his being with us. So it's just brilliant. And we're in part two of a 2 week series based on the kingdom parables. And the reason we've been emphasizing the kingdom and the kingdom parables is that it's Jesus's message. His whole message is about the present availability of the kingdom for anyone who wants to live in it, that he brought that to us if we choose to live in it. And this is actually our second series of parables so far this year, of kingdom parables, because Jesus told so many of them. And like Christine last week, and she did a great job, I've leaned on insights from Dallas Willard as I've prepared for today. And just a reminder about what a parable actually is. It's where Jesus tells a story from ordinary everyday life to convey a profound spiritual truth. And he told the stories, he designed them that we would think about them, that we would reflect on them and think later on about the stories, because they were all very memorable, easy to remember, so that we would reflect on them, think about our thinking, so that we could understand God, the availability of his kingdom, and what he's doing in the world and ourselves in a more way based on reality, which is based on who God is and who we are. So this is the parable, like Johnny said, about the no-show guests. And the setting is in Luke chapter 14. So Jesus has been invited to dinner in a Pharisee's house. And he notes that the guests are kind of jockeying for position, trying to get the important seats at the dinner table. And then Jesus says to the host, he sees this going on, and he says to the host, he said, you know what? When you throw a party, invite the poor and the blind and the lame, invite the people who can't invite you back, and then you will be blessed in the kingdom of God. And so one of the guests overhears this, and he then says in verse 15, he said, blessed is the man who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God. And then Jesus uses that as an opportunity to teach about the kingdom of God. So I'm just going to read from verse 16. It says, Jesus replied, a certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent the servant to tell those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. But they all began to make excuses. The first said, I've just bought a field. I must go and see it. Please excuse me. Another said, I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Still another said, I've just got married, so I can't come. The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets and the alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame. Sir, the servant said, what you've ordered has been done, but there's still room. And then the master told the servant, go out to the roads and the country lanes and the bowreens and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. He's throwing a party and he wants it packed. I tell you, not one of those who are invited will get a taste of my banquet. So basically the story is people have been invited to a feast or a banquet or a party, but they've excuses or reasons not to come. And the main point that Jesus is making here is that for many people, the ordinary everyday things of life become those things that prevent us from taking up Jesus' offer to be his apprentice, where we learn to live life in the kingdom through being with Jesus, learning to be like Jesus. And so what Jesus wants to do is teach this man and teach us something about why people don't come into God's banquet and why people don't take up Jesus' invitation to be his disciple or apprentice in kingdom living. So he gives 3 examples, or he talks about 3 people who've been invited to the feast. Now, it looks like they've been invited. They knew the party was coming. And so they got the invite in advance. And then on the day of the feast, the servants come and say, everything is now ready. Come today. But each one of them had an excuse or a reason not to come. The first one had just bought a field. Another had just bought 5 yoke of oxen. But if you think about those two excuses, like if you'd bought a field or if you'd bought oxen, you would have seen them already before you bought them. And if you didn't, going to see them now isn't going to make any difference. It was kind of pointless. Now, the third just got married, and which seems a reasonable excuse to our ears to not come to the party, but actually in their day, it wasn't. So 3 people are invited to a party, but they don't come because there's other things, actually good things, that they need to attend to. And what I'd like to do is, like, Jesus tells these stories to get us to think about our thinking. So what I'd like to do is give 2 illustrations and 2 conclusions to help us unpack this story that Jesus tells that has a profound truth about the kingdom. So the first illustration, first conclusion. Supposing the local creche invited you to come and speak to the children in the creche. There's 6 3-year-olds in the creche and they want you to come and speak to the children. But the weekend they've invited you to come is the weekend that you'd planned to go to Galway. So what do? Do you take up their invite, or do you say, well, I have to go to Galway? Most of us would probably say, you know what? Please excuse me. I just can't come and give the talk to the 3-year-olds because I'd already planned to go to Galway. That's what most of us would probably do. Now, suppose instead of being invited to give a talk to the 3-year-olds, the head of the United Nations rings you up and said, listen, we really need you to come and tell your story to the United Nations in General Assembly. Will you come to New York? We'll pay for the trip and everything. Now, forget about being nervous, kind of thinking, gosh, I couldn't do that. And forget about, well, what would I say anyway? Never mind those things. But you've been invited to speak to the United Nations in General Assembly, but it was the weekend you planned to go to Galway. So what do? If you can get over your nerves, if you can get over your kind of, well, what am I going to say? You're going to go to New York, even to be in New York for the weekend. So you will decide to go to New York. So that's the illustration, the conclusion. In the case of the story that Jesus is telling, the people who were invited to his feast, they found something else, something they thought was more important to do than to attend a feast. Now remember, the feast is the invitation to live life in the kingdom of God. And people, Jesus is saying, will do what they think is most important. You prioritize it over other things. That's what the guy with the ox was doing. That's what the guy with the field was doing. And Jesus is saying that's what many people do. They prioritize the ordinary things of everyday life over responding to Jesus' invitation to live life in the kingdom of God as his disciple or as his apprentice. So illustration 2, conclusion 2. So another time you're going away, this time you're going to Kerry for the weekend. But someone you barely know invites you to their party. But it's the same weekend as you're going to Kerry. So what do? Probably most of us kind of think, you know what, I don't really know this guy. To be honest, I don't really care that much about him because I don't know him. I'm just going to say, sorry, I can't come. I plan to go to Kerry. Now, supposing the invite wasn't from someone you barely knew, but it was from your best friend. And so your best friend has invited you to come to his party, but it's on the same weekend that you plan to go to Kerry. So what might you do then? You'd probably think, you know what, I'm going to skip going to Kerry because I really care about my friend. I don't want to disappoint him. And to be honest, I really want to be with him at his party. So you'd go to the party. So the conclusion, in the case of the story that Jesus is telling, the people invited didn't really care about the person who was inviting them. And remember, in Jesus' story, the person doing the inviting is Jesus himself. Now, this is just a story that Jesus is telling, but it's a story with a profound teaching about the kingdom of God. And it's forcing us to ask ourselves, how are we responding to Jesus' invitation to live our lives under his rule? You see, the guy's excuses for not coming to the party not living life in the kingdom of God, they weren't bad excuses. They weren't saying, you know what, I can't come, I need to go and rob a shop. They weren't doing that. There was nothing wrong with their excuses. They weren't evil things. It's just they didn't have time to go to the party. The little ordinary things of life, the ox in the field, they were prioritized and prevented them from going to the party. And they didn't care enough about the person who was doing the inviting. You see, these three guys, they would only go to the party, they'd only respond to it if they thought it was more important to do than anything else they could be doing at the time. And if the person who was doing the inviting was someone who was really important to them. So applying that to the kingdom of God and Jesus' invite to live our lives in it, it's only if we learn to love the King and life in his kingdom will we make the time to be his disciple, will we choose to be his disciple. You see, typically, we're not prevented from being his disciple by like the evil things of the world dragging us away. It's the kind of ordinary, everyday, mundane things that fill up our lives. And that's the point that Jesus is making, giving the ordinary, everyday things in life priority over responding to Jesus' invitation to live life with him. That's what prevents us from being his apprentice, from being his disciple, from living life in the kingdom of God. A famous preacher from years ago, actually, he's so famous, I can't remember his name. He was asked, how come so many people who claim to be Christians, like proclaim they want to live their life for God, but there's so few Christ-like people? And his response was, the chief reason is that they give too big a place to the things in life that are indifferent. They give too big a place to the ordinary, everyday things of life, and it squeezes out this discipleship with Jesus. You know, when I was studying in America, I took what was called 2 full caseloads. So in any semester, a full amount of study was 3 courses every semester, and I took 6. And the reason was because it was really important to me. I would never get this chance again to study theology. So I wanted to make the most of it. And then I had 2 jobs because I had to pay for all this. And I had friends that I hang around with, and I was involved in church. So I was really, really busy. And then I met Debbie. And as you know, those of you who know me and Debbie, she's way out of my league. And she must have been kind of feeling unwell or dizzy or something when I asked her out, because she agreed to go out with me. And now all of a sudden, I had to find 10 extra hours a week. But you know what I discovered? There aren't 10 extra hours in the week to find. But I was falling in love with Debbie. So I made the time to spend with her. I spent less time studying, although studying was very important for me. I spent less time in one of the jobs. I didn't see my other friends as much, so I could be with Debbie. You see, I didn't find the time to be with Debbie as if there was 10 hours lying around in the week that I could pick up. I made the time to be with Debbie. The other things, important things, got dropped because they weren't as important as getting to know this person. You will never find the time to be with Jesus, learning to be like him. We must make the time to be with him, learning to be like him. It's not, when the job changes or when COVID changes or when the children grow up or when whatever, you will never find the time because something will fill it up. We have to make that time. And it would be really good to ask ourselves, what is my equivalent of the field that I just bought, or my oxen? What are those little things in ordinary everyday life that I'm choosing to do, that I'm prioritizing, that prevent me from being with Jesus, learning to be like Jesus? And remember, they won't be bad things. Now, the parable then ends, but the theme continues in the rest of the chapter, and it continues to drive the point. And what's been drawn out is all these little choices of good things, these little indifferent things, lead us down a path. And that path is a path that drifts away from Jesus. It's a path that drifts away from discipleship. Because discipleship, as we will see in a minute, is an intentional decision. It doesn't just happen. And that drifting is a profound loss, a profound tragedy in the lives of many Christians. So let me read the following verse. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." They're really heavy words. But Jesus isn't saying here, hate your parents, because only if you hate your parents can you be my disciple. Obviously, he isn't saying that. It goes against everything else he would have been saying, and everything else that the Old Testament would say as well. So what is he saying? Now, remember, he's saying this right after, it comes right after the parable that we've just discussed, where Jesus is talking about people letting the ordinary everyday things squeeze out time with him, relationship with him, the thing that matters most. So what is Jesus saying? He isn't saying, I won't allow you to be my disciple. He's simply saying, you can't be my disciple unless you seek the kingdom of God first. It'd be kind of like if I said to you, you know what, you can't go swimming unless you get into the water. You wouldn't hear me saying that I'm not giving you permission to go swimming unless you get into the water. You'd hear me saying, well, that's just what swimming is. If you want to swim, you get in the water. That's just what it is. And that's what Jesus is saying. It's not an issue of permission. He's simply saying, if you want to be my disciple, the only way it works is if you seek the kingdom first. That's the only way it works. If you want to make contact with and live in the kingdom of God, you have to seek it first. It has to be first, not after your field, not after your ox, not even after your family. Although if you seek the kingdom of God first, you love your family more. But you must seek the kingdom first. You can't make contact with the kingdom of God, let alone live in it, unless you seek it and Jesus first. And that's why encountering Jesus is so important. Realizing that he is the one, he is it. Whatever you've been looking for, longing for, whatever you've been designed for, you find it in relationship with Jesus. And you see what happens when you find that Jesus is the one, then you begin to organize your life around connectedness with him. You begin to organize your life around being with him, learning to be like him. And actually, there's a great example of this parable in action in the Gospel of Luke. It's the story of Martha and Mary, and I'm just going to read it. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you're worried and upset about many things, but few are needed, indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. It's really important that we understand what's happening here. It's actually the parable in action. Both Martha and Mary are drawn to Jesus. Both had all those little ordinary things in life that needed to get done. But for Martha, those little ordinary things in life that needed to get done led her down a pathway that was not being with Jesus. Mary, she also had all those ordinary things that needed to be done. But being with Jesus is what she sought first. She intentionally chose Jesus first. Intention is key. A conscious, deliberate choice is key. Becoming a disciple or an apprentice and living as a disciple is an intentional decision. It isn't a statement of how spiritually mature you are. The whole idea of being an apprentice or a learner knocks that right out. So it's not a statement of spiritual maturity, but what it is a statement of who or what you organize your life around. And that is so important for us to understand today, because we can often think that what it means to be a Christian is to invite Jesus into our heart, to pray a prayer, seeking his forgiveness, trust his forgiveness, and the assurance of heaven that comes from what he's done. And none of that is wrong, but it's not really the invitation to the banquet that Jesus offers. You see, in a sense today, it's possible to be a Christian, a church-attending, Bible-believing Christian, and not be a disciple. Someone who seeks the kingdom of God first. And something's profoundly wrong with that picture. And for some of us, as you're listening, you might think, I did invite Jesus into my heart, but I never really decided to be his disciple. At least not a disciple on Jesus' terms, where I organize my life around being with Jesus, learning to be like Jesus. Now remember, Jesus isn't saying, I won't let you be my disciple. He's simply saying you can't be my disciple unless you cross that bridge of intentionality where you're being with Jesus, learning to be like Jesus, and it's the most central thing in your life. And as you think about that, you can kind of think, gosh, that feels like a loss, like all the stuff I'd have to give up to make Jesus first. But when I was going out with Debbie and pursuing Debbie, there was a lot of stuff I had to give up. But if you were to ask me, did it feel like cost? I would say, but look what I'm getting. Look what I'm getting. So all the sacrifices that you and me make to become disciples of Jesus are nothing compared to being alive in the kingdom of God. It's kind of like a statue giving up the cost of being a statue so it can become a living person. Actually, it's no cost at all. You see, Jesus is that good. The life he offers is that good that whatever your ox is, whatever your field is, it pales into second behind Jesus and life with him. The intentional decision to become a disciple or an apprentice in kingdom living, it's simply the opportunity of a lifetime. So how is it supposed to work? Because life is really busy. So let's look at maybe what might be one of the hardest stages in life. You're a mother at home with 2 or 3 little children, and all you are is exhausted. That is from the moment you wake up, you don't stop until your head hits the pillow. And then you're woken up a few times in the middle of the night. You're so tired, you can't do another thing. So what does intentionality and prioritizing look like for you? It's really hard. It's really hard. You don't have any time. You're exhausted. But maybe you could do something like this. Every time you change a nappy, those 2 or 3 minutes, that's 6 or 7 or 10 times a day, just dial up an awareness of Jesus. Remind yourself that he's your good shepherd. Remind yourself that Jesus' care for you is more constant, more real, more omnipresent, to quote Lauren, more immediate, more profound than your care for the child right in front of you there and then. Talk to him during that time. Listen to him during that time. Jesus knows that you don't have time to take a morning off, let alone go away for a lovely spiritual retreat for a week. But if you turn to Jesus every time you change a nappy, you will meet Jesus there. There's no place he isn't. You will meet him there, and he will teach you to become a disciple, organizing your life around being with Jesus, learning to be like Jesus. And that sounds really easy for a day. But to do that day in, day out, nappy after nappy after nappy, that requires intentionality. Just like other people who are super busy and kind of think, I'm so busy, but maybe driving to work, I could put on worship music, or I could listen to teaching, or I could just talk to Jesus all the way. Easy to do for one day. But the intentionality of keep doing it is what it looks like to organize your life around being with Jesus. And for others of us, it might mean less time in front of a screen or on social media, less time at the gym. The parable is really easy to understand. People have good reasons for not going to a party, but it carries a profound truth. Many people, many good people, fail to take up Jesus' invitation to be his disciple and experience life in the kingdom of God and care of the King, because other things, good things, get in the way. So let me end by asking you some questions. What are the ordinary things, or are there ordinary things in life that are preventing you from taking up Jesus' invitation to be his disciple, to live life in the kingdom of God? And the thing to do is, can you name them? What are they? Can you name them? And then what's the difference between finding time to be with Jesus as opposed to making time to be with Jesus? And which one do you do? And now, many of us decided to become become a Christian years ago or this year, but have you ever intentionally decided to become a disciple of Jesus on Jesus' terms? Someone whose first priority is being with Jesus, learning to be like Jesus, organizing your life around connecting with Jesus. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. And if you've never invited Jesus into your life, if you're convinced that Jesus is the one, he's the center of everything, he is the sustainer and giver of life, and he will give you life if you ask him. Just ask him. Say, Jesus, you are it. I'm not even sure what it means, but I know you're it. I just want to live my life and organize my life around being with you, learning to be like you. And he will come right in and begin that journey with you. He is that good. He wants his party packed with people. He says, go out to the highways, the byways, the bowrings, bring them in. Bring them in. And you know, the response for us is to be, let's decide to take Jesus up on that invitation, to live life being with Jesus, learning to be like Jesus. So now what we're going to do is we're going to celebrate communion, and Lawrence is going to join us together as we remember all that Jesus has done for us.